Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. We have a ton of legislative news to dig into today. We'll be talking about the Equality Act. We will be talking about COVID relief. But before talking about any of that, massive news late last night. The House of Representatives, thanks to Democrats, mostly this was Democrats who voted for this. Democrats in the House have passed the massive voting rights and anti-corruption bill H.R. 1. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna talked to us about this when we interviewed him last week. And this is not the first time that H.R. 1 has passed in the House. It's the second time that it has passed. Just like the first time it passed, it's not clear how it passes the Senate, and we'll talk about that. But this is an extensive bill, 800 pages, all sorts of different things contained within it. But the big items are a national system for automatic voter registration. This is something I've been talking about for a decade. It's something that would dramatically increase participation in elections, and it would ask. Right now, you have to opt in if you want to register to vote. The default is if you do nothing, you're not registered. You have to opt in. The system proposed in H.R. 1 would create an automatic voter registration system where you have to opt out if you don't want to be registered to vote. And why would you do that? If you don't want to vote, you just wouldn't vote. And most people would just remain registered. The bill would require every state to put online options for voter registration, correcting your voter registration, canceling or designating a party affiliation, things that in other countries are just obvious that you have. Any developed country should have these things. The bill would require at least 15 consecutive days of early voting for federal elections, and early voting sites would have to be open for at least 10 hours a day. This would short circuit and preempt many of the state level voter suppression tactics that Republicans have been using for a long time. And the bill would also ban states from restricting someone's ability to vote by mail. And it will also require states to prepay postage on return envelopes for mail-in voting so it doesn't cost people money to vote by mail. The bill would ban voter roll purges and also would ban the use of non-forwardable mail as a way to remove voters from rolls. Every one of these elements goes directly at a technique used by the right to suppress the vote. And very interestingly, H.R. 1 establishes a public financing of campaigns with small donations. The federal government would do a voluntary 6-to-1 match for candidates for president and Congress, which means every dollar a candidate raises from small donors, the federal government would match 6 times over. And the maximum small donation that would be matched is capped at $200. It's not funded by taxpayer dollars. The money comes from a 4.75% fee on criminal and civil fines, fees, penalties, and settlements with banks and corporations that do corporate malfeasance. Very interesting way to structure and finance this. And it also contains, and again, we can't possibly cover every line, but there are transparency requirements for political advertising in H.R. 1. It would establish nonpartisan redistricting commissions to end partisan gerrymandering. Massive issue. Again, we've been talking about it for a decade. It would require presidential and vice presidential candidates to disclose 10 years of tax returns. And we know directly what that's related to. It would stop members of Congress from using taxpayer money to settle sexual harassment or discrimination cases, and so many other things. Now, beautiful bill has passed the House. How does it pass the Senate? And the answer is it doesn't unless it's modified significantly, but maybe something can pass. The question is why? Democrats control the Senate. Democrats voted for this in the House. Why can't Democrats pass it? The answer is there are just too many moderates in the Democratic Party in the Senate, and the majority is too slim. In fact, it's the slimmest possible majority. The Senate is 50-50, Democrats, Republicans. Because Democrats are in the White House, Kamala Harris becomes the tie-breaking vote in the Senate when there is a 50-50 tie. But This requires 60 votes to pass the Senate. So in other words, I'm unsure that if it only required 50, it would pass the Senate. But they need 60 votes anyway. Now, one idea that Democrats are thinking about is amending the Senate filibuster rules so that any democracy reform legislation like H.R. 1 could pass with a simple majority instead of 60 votes. Now, that's great if Joe Manchin goes for it, and that's very much unclear. If Jeanne Shaheen goes for it, I don't know if this is a bill that Jeanne Shaheen is interested in passing. So right now, the situation anyway is you need 60 votes. Now, this is an issue on which there is almost no overlap between Democrats and Republicans. We talk on this program, some shows love to take these black-white positions like there's no relevant difference between Democrats and Republicans. And the truth is that on some issues, there's no relevant difference between Democrats and Republicans. And on other issues, they couldn't be more different. Democrats, at least in the House, are passing H.R. 1, which is a massive expansion in voting rights. It would permanently cement many temporary expansions on the basis of coronavirus. That's Democrats, at least in the House. On the other hand, as we talked about on, I think it was Monday, Republicans have more than 250 bills in 43 different states to suppress the vote, to make it more difficult to vote. So these are diametrically opposed priorities on these issues between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats doing everything they can to increase participation in elections, Republicans doing everything they can to decrease participation. Now, you can take a cynical view and say, well, both sides are doing what they think is best for them. Democrats believe more people voting is good for Democrats. Republicans believe fewer people voting is good for Republicans. They are both probably correct. The difference is one of them is actually in line with the principles and values that this country is based on, which is not disenfranchising people, giving people a voice, not obstructing the ability of people to participate in the democratic process. It's hard to argue that the country is based on the values that are exhibited by 250 Republican bills in 43 states to suppress the vote. So, yeah, sure, you can take the view that it's quite simple and it's Democrats want more people to vote, so they win. Republicans want fewer people to vote, so they win. One of those perspectives happens to be in line with the foundation of this country. Now, as a very practical matter in the immediate, Republicans have a particularly pressing reason to oppose H.R. 1, which is that their winning the House back in 2022 could depend on whether something like H.R. 1 passes or doesn't pass. And we'll talk more about that in the future. That's H.R. 1. Let's now talk about COVID stimulus. In this continuing, almost never-ending saga of trying to get COVID relief passed, Joe Biden has negotiated, not with Republicans, but with more moderate Democrats to further restrict who is eligible for a stimulus check. What? If you're wondering, great, now that they've negotiated, which Republicans are going to support the bill as a result of the negotiation? The answer is I'm not aware of any. This is Democrats negotiating with Democrats to weaken COVID stimulus just to get it passed. And either way, it doesn't appear as though Republicans are going to support this. Now, I know that there are people in my audience who will be mad for this critique, but come on, guys. 2000. Now I'm going to get to the pragmatic piece. So just let me work through it. OK, here's the just disgusting, frustrating part of all of this. $2,000 became $1,400. And when I critiqued that, some people wrote to me and said, David, it was obvious from the beginning Joe Biden meant we would add $1,400 to the $600 to make it $2,000. That's not a fair critique. You're doing a bad critique, David. OK. Then I say, well, Joe Biden said it would pass right away. And it didn't pass right away. It's March. And I critique that. And some people wrote to me and said, David, you should have known that when a president says right away, they don't mean right away. They mean months. OK. And now to get the $1,400 check, the checks are going to phase out more quickly as income goes up. So here's the changes that were made. Under the old plan passed by the House, you get $1,400 if your income is up to $75,000, and it starts phasing down to zero once your income is 100,000. Under the new plan, it's just more restrictive. The 1,400 starts phasing out and it goes to zero at 80 grand instead of at 100 grand. So in short, in the House version, anyone making over 100,000 gets zero. In the Senate version that was negotiated yesterday between Biden and Senate Republicans, anyone earning over $80,000 a year gets zero. Now, do I think that this is a really dumb negotiation? Yes. The phase out at $100,000 was fine. But the reality is, with a 50-50 majority in the Senate, 50-50 with Kamala as the deciding vote in ties, Democrats can't afford to lose a single vote. So Joe Manchin now has power. Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire who also wanted to restrict the checks, she has power. She wants to take the money saved by dropping the limit and send that money to hospitals. Okay. Does it still make sense to pass this bill? It does. In addition to the stimulus checks, the bill has $350 billion for states, $130 billion for opening schools, $160 billion for vaccinations and testing, an enhanced child tax credit, rental assistance, food assistance. So it's important to pass this regardless, and we can't keep delaying it. But is this a really lame negotiation where it's Democrats negotiating with Democrats and either way Republicans won't support it? Of course it is. At some point, we have to recognize, even though they're Democrats, they're very moderate. Some we would even say are almost sort of like centrist Republicans, people like Joe Manchin. It's just the reality. And it's not even that I think it's that important that people earning $98,000 get a check. Like, it's more the idea that we have zero Republicans on board. It's an emergency to pass this, and Democrats are negotiating with each other over whether the cutoff should be 80 grand or 100 grand. It's sort of like a what are we doing here type of moment. I get that if you make $98,000, you make $1,400 in like 5 or 6 days of work. This is less about that. It's the big picture of absurdity of how it hasn't even nearly been, only because of Republicans, that this hasn't passed. And of course, the $15 minimum wage is just gone from the bill altogether. But we've already covered that and we knew it. Now, on the minimum wage, I'm getting some emails, which I support. OK, I'm getting emails from people saying, David, you know, the Senate parliamentarian who decided you can't do the $15 minimum wage in this bill. The Senate parliamentarian can just be overruled. It's not, you know, people are acting like, oh, it would be a massive step to overrule the Senate parliamentarian. OK, yeah, it would or it wouldn't. But the truth is, if you overrule the Senate parliamentarian and you include a $15 minimum wage in the COVID relief bill, I just don't think it passes. I don't think Joe Manchin votes for the bill. And you can't afford to lose a single vote in the Senate right now, given that no Republicans plan to vote for it. So I'm just as disgusted as you are by what's going on. Don't mistake this for me not being disgusted. In a practical reality, they're just not going to vote for it if it's in the bill. It's not going to pass. Even if you override the Senate parliamentarian and put it in the bill, it's not going to get passed. Now, you could make the argument, and I know some in my audience will, that it's worth it, and it's worth it not passing to get those Democratic senators on the record saying they're against it. They're already on the record. They've said it in interviews. They've put statements out. So you're just slowing down getting money to anybody. And but bottom line is, we've been talking about since November 4th, even with the 2 Georgia Senate seats that Democrats took from Republicans, you still need to convince Joe Manchin. That wasn't an understatement. That wasn't just something I said for fun. It's Joe Manchin and it's Jeanne Shaheen. And over the next couple of years, it'll be 1 or 2 other Democratic senators as well. The answer is we have to flip more seats. Saying primary Joe Manchin in West Virginia, if you run Bernie in West Virginia against Joe Manchin and somehow Bernie wins the primary, then a Republican wins that seat. The answer isn't to I mean, listen, primary Joe Manchin if you want. I'm not saying don't. But the solution here is you need more than a 50-50 majority. And then, you know, we get to the question of, is this the last and final COVID stimulus? Our friend, Congressman Ro Khanna, last week on the show said he doesn't think it should be the final stimulus. I would love to not need another coronavirus stimulus. That's going to be determined by how quickly cases decline, how quickly vaccinations increase. I'm not seeing an appetite for more stimulus after this bill is done at the Congress level. Although some individual members of the House and Senate do want more stimulus, this may actually be it. And it would be great if nothing else was needed. But that's just it remains a question mark. Send me your thoughts about all of this negotiation. You can find me on Twitter at @dpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist. And what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. And you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is not funded by big corporations or rich corporate donors, regardless of what you see posted in the comments of my YouTube channel. In all seriousness, don't even look at the comments. It's pretty toxic. But in all seriousness, you can support the show by grabbing a membership at joinpakman.com. You can use the coupon code BETTER21 to save hugely off of a membership. You'll get the daily members only bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show. Sign up at joinpakman.com. This morning, I was browsing the David Pakman Show subreddit, where nearly 30,000 of our viewers and listeners are now subscribed. You can find the subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. Very interesting post this morning about how the actual effective tax rate for the bottom 80% of people is actually higher in Texas than in California. There's been a big movement lately, including in the context of COVID, people wanting more freedom, and particularly with the recent news that Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott is ending all COVID guidelines, ending mask mandates, opening everything wide open in Texas. There's been this idea for a while, and it's been bolstered by certain celebrities like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk announcing they are abandoning California and going to Texas. There's this assumption that you just pay a lot less in taxes if you go to Texas. And that is true for people who make a lot of money. But the reality is that for a lot of people, the state tax rate is actually higher in Texas when you consider state and local taxes. And there's a really good post about this. It's actually, someone posted it to our subreddit, but it's a link to the Joe Rogan subreddit. And it outlines this. And I think that it's important to understand that in some cases, when you go from a so-called high tax state to a low tax state, you really are paying less in taxes. In many cases, you're not. There are states with no state income tax where property taxes and sales taxes, for example, are significantly higher. We've talked before about how you can also hide taxes and other transaction fees. There are places where you might say, oh, the sales tax is low and there's a low or no income tax, but every fee associated with driving a car, insurance requirements on different elements. There are lots of different ways in which living in one state versus another can be more expensive. And people who make decisions based solely on state income tax are often, what's the word? Surprised. They receive a rude awakening when they realize that, hey, I'm not paying a state income tax anymore, or not one that's as high. but I'm paying all of these new and different things. Very interesting analysis. I encourage you to look at it in detail. Another post, and this is sort of like from the news of the obvious and unsurprising. The creator of that CPAC golden Trump statue now admits that it was made in China. I don't know how many of you even followed this story, but there was this incredibly cult-like, I mean, really disturbingly cult-like golden Trump statue that was wheeled through CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference over the weekend, which we covered. And aside from it all being really weird because people were almost like praying at the altar of this thing, extraordinarily cult-like Trumpian behavior, people started asking, where was this thing made? This would be really expensive to make in the United States. And I guess initially the guy who made it said it was made in Mexico. I don't even know if that's good or bad. But then we ultimately found out that it was actually made in China. And I don't even think we have to comment. A lot of the Trump campaign gear for years was made in China while Trump was publicly saying China's crushing us on this, China's crushing us on that. Well, partially maybe they're crushing us because you're giving them your own business. We now found out that the Trump golden statue was made in China. Not surprising, but predictably hypocritical. Join the discussion by joining the subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. You know, one of the things that we used to cover on the show regularly before gay marriage was legalized nationally were all sorts of wild claims from religious right people about all of the terrible things that they thought gay people were doing. And this ranged from gay people are indoctrinating children into being gay. Children are being convinced to be gay by gay people, to all sorts of things I don't even want to say because I don't want this video to be demonetized. This type of thing died down a little bit when gay marriage was legalized nationally, and the anti-gay focus shifted to so-called religious freedom. But things are now coming full circle, and once again, these wacky right-wing politicians are getting into the same sort of stuff again, and this might be one of the most ridiculous ones I've seen. This happened yesterday. This is an interview with newly minted Trumpian Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, whose big issue has been she wants to carry guns on the floor of the House of Representatives. She went on something called The War Room and/or Real America's Voice. I don't even fully understand what this is. And she stated, I hope you're sitting down. She stated that the Equality Act currently being worked on in Congress is really a bill for gay and lesbian supremacy. And she believes that it is being, this is her word, it is also being carried out by Transvexhikes. Transvexhikes. Yes, that's her word, not mine. Take a listen to this.
We can't say the same for the so-called Equality Act, which we all know that's just the Democrats using a play on words. There's nothing about equality in that act. If anything, it's supremacy of gays and lesbians and Transvexhikes. I mean, like, that's what this is about putting them higher than anyone else. It's not about equality.
Transvexhikes. That is really something else. This is what happens when you elect people who know nothing, stand for nothing, and bring nothing to the table. But they supported Trump, and that's why you voted for them. This is what happens. And I've talked, but this applies to Marjorie Taylor Greene. This applies to Madison Cawthorn, people who basically run social media offices. They don't run policy offices. They run social media offices. And of course, this is embarrassing. It's homophobic. It's disgusting. It's pathetic. It's all of the different things that we've known these folks to be for a long time. But I'll take this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about the Equality Act. It's not about transvexhike supremacy. And of course, the word is transgender. I want to be clear that it's not just that she's mispronouncing the word. The word we use is transgender. But one of the most important things that this bill would do is it would amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act to explicitly prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. I've spoken before, since gay marriage was legalized nationally by the Supreme Court decision, there are still many states in which you can discriminate against people based on their real or perceived sexual orientation. That is not banned federally at this point in time. This act would ban it, and that's extraordinarily important. The Equality Act would also expand protections for protected classes beyond just employment and housing. It would cover any federally funded program. It would include public accommodations, which means retail stores, stadiums, and other venues. Yes, this does relate to the anti-gay cake baker. It would impact that sort of situation. And the playbook for opponents of the Equality Act is very predictable, and we're seeing it there with Lauren Boebert. It's assassination of character. It's, I guess, also creating new words like Transvexhikes, but it's also saying that the bill goes too far. It's saying the bill threatens businesses or people who might have legitimate religious objections to serving LGBT individuals in their businesses. Now, the bill does need 60 votes in the Senate. It's unclear Democrats can find 10 Republicans to get this done. We know, we talk about it's the same conversation. Maybe Susan Collins, maybe Lisa Murkowski. Mitt Romney has already said he's not going to vote in favor of this in the Senate. Rob Portman is unclear whether he has any interest in voting for this in the Senate. So it looks much like the same old story. We're going to observe and see. But trust me, this is not about Transvexhike supremacy. That's the last thing that this is about. And we'll have more coverage of this bill and COVID relief and HR1 on our Instagram page. Find us at David Pakman Show on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman as well.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today we're going to be speaking with James Fletcher, who is the producer and director of the documentary film The Accidental President. I appear in this film. I've played the trailer for my audience on the live stream that I've done recently, and I appear very early in the trailer, which I really appreciate. James, it's so great to have you on. Okay, so The Accidental President. I think we can sort of infer the idea that Donald Trump wanted to run for president, not necessarily to be president. Talk to us about the premise there.
Well, I mean, it's like the plot of a ridiculous Hollywood movie that got out of control. I mean, I contest this was an attention-seeking exercise that went crazy. And Donald Trump was looking for a bit of attention. And suddenly, by breaking all the rules, if you like, of campaign law, he became the front runner in the Republican field. And the thing ran away, and we all know what happened. So the title alludes to the fact that this was nothing more than a bit of fun he was having, and suddenly it took on a whole life of its own.
In the film, you interview all sorts of folks from sort of more pragmatic, traditional Republicans all the way to what I guess I would call more cultish true believers like Scott Adams of Dilbert fame. Can you talk a little bit about what were the trends you saw in terms of their perspective on this presidency of Trump's, comparing the more traditional Republicans who have been involved in the party for some time versus these kind of new entrants who are really Trump fans more than they are anything else?
Well, of course, you know, the Trump president, one title we played with for the film was the hostile takeover, but I thought Trump would have liked that too much. But he, in fact, did the same to the Republican Party. And as you say, the Republican establishment were shocked and completely unprepared for his arrival. They didn't know how to deal with it or confront him as a candidate. And of course, they treated him, for the most part, as a joke. So in finding our interviewees, we wanted to look at people from all corners of the establishment. We spoke to Matt Schlapp, the chairman of CPAC, who I don't think was a Trumpista, if one's really honest about it.
Right.
But then we went, as you say, to people like Scott Adams, who at the time wasn't really pro-Trump as he is now, because we wanted to illustrate that inside the Republican Party, there were two very different factions, people who believe in the GOP and people who believe in Trump.
Do you know who? So there's all these stories of even up to Election Day, Trump still didn't think he was going to win and was shocked when he won. And in contrast to that, there was the Republican primary process in 2016, which started with 17. And as it started to get whittled down, Trump ended up sort of accruing the support from all of these people whose 1%, 2%, 3% support ended up having to find a new place to go. Who figured out that Trump could win more quickly? The people immediately around Trump or the Republican establishment that was watching this?
That's a really good question. I honestly don't know the answer, but what was explained to me was if you, for example, hated or you loved Ted Cruz, but you hated, Marco Rubio, you thought, well, I'll put the votes on Trump because he's not gonna do well anyway. He'll probably drop out. Actually, that's a terrible example because they were some of the last people standing.
Right.
If you take Rand Paul, for example, with his 1%,
Right.
I mean, you would transfer your 1% to Trump because that was before Christmas, and people thought this is all a bit of fun, but it would be over fairly soon. And so Trump was blessed by this mathematical advantage of having 16 opponents. And as these people fell out one by one, almost for a bit of entertainment, if I think a lot of people are really honest with themselves, they put the money on Trump because he was such compelling viewing, so entertaining in a field of Republicans where the other 16 basically blurred into one. And I think the entertainment value of Trump is not to be underestimated in any way.
That's interesting. So some of that Trump support that shifted early from the ones and twos, as we were calling them at the time, were people who were sort of thinking eventually I will settle on whoever is the nominee, and it probably will be somebody other than Trump.
That's right. And this is a bit of entertainment along the way, and we'll see where the cards land, and then we'll decide who we're going to be serious about. But of course, as is often the case in politics, you need to put your stake in the ground earlier in the process rather than later.
Did you get any kind of sense of when and how the Republican establishment, when it became clear that it was going to be Trump as the nominee, not as the eventual president, but as the nominee, how did they sort of race into action to try to get control of the candidacy?
Well, that's right. And Matt Schlapp talks about this in the film. I mean, that panic happened again too late. A lot of people treated Trump as a bit of a sideshow, and so they didn't tackle him in the way he would have been tackled, in my opinion, if he were treated as a serious candidate from day one. And a lot of people thought the damage he could do to, for example, if I'm against Marco Rubio, it doesn't hurt me to think he's going to insult Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush with the nicknames and run them down. So he's actually doing me a favor. And as long as he's in the field, he's probably good for me. But what a lot of people overlooked was the fact that, as Molly Ball put it, he would run through the Republican field like a buzzsaw. And it was too late by the time people in the Republican establishment realized this had happened. And there was frankly very little they could do about it. And certainly by the time he reached 1237, which people forget happened before the convention. So he goes to the Republican convention as the presumed nominee.
Right. And one of the things that we've talked about in terms of that process is that if Donald Trump had run as in the Democratic primary, he never would have stood a shot. There are fundamental differences between the Democratic primary electorate and the Republican primary electorate, which, even if accounting for this idea of, I wanted Rand and he's out, I'll say Trump, but eventually I'll go with whoever it is, Jeb. Even if you account for that, Trump would have never gone anywhere in the Democratic primary. Did any of the people you spoke to in some way comment on or understand that this was only possible because of who Republican primary voters are?
I think that's right. And, it's also worth mentioning that at the convention, there was an attempt to destabilize the Trump candidacy. And Paul Manafort got a lot of credit for spotting those threats and seeing them off. But yes, I mean, fundamentally, the difference between the two parties was magnified and made very clear by the way Trump was able to march through that field effectively unchallenged.
At this point, is there any sort of you can't argue with success type of perspective because of what Donald Trump was able to do? Or does the fact that he was made only the 10th one-term president, and this is post filming of the documentary, but it's sort of more of a now question. Does the fact that he was made a one-term president in some way vindicate the people who early on were not Trump people?
It's a really interesting thought, but I mean, I would say one of the COVID killed Trump. I mean, I don't know where you stand on that, but I think
I agree.
I think without COVID, he probably would have sailed through re-election. But nevertheless, for 4 years, his business card said President of the United States, and he won. And and as painful as that is for a lot of people, our film is looking at how he won and how basically a game show host became the most powerful person on the planet because it happened. And admittedly, it was a perfect storm of all kinds of luck, bizarre circumstances, as you say, the Republican establishment and their rules. But he won, and nearly won twice. And so I contest there is a very solid basis on which to launch an inquiry, in this case, a documentary called The Accidental President.
What do you think is the desire of the more traditional Republican Party insiders that would be the future of the Republican Party? Because now there's this question with people like Madison Cawthorn and Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who really are only in Congress because they were on Trump's side and they were simpatico to Trump. We don't know whether they will be reelected or not in 2022. And there's a real question as to whether the Republican Party will remain a Trumpian party or go back to what it was before. The more traditional insider types that you interviewed in the film, what do you think they want now?
Well, I think 2022 will be really interesting if the Republicans come storming back and Trump in some way as this de facto leader of the opposition. I know that's not an office, obviously, in American politics, but he's not put himself there. If they do very well in 2022 and they're his people and he can take the credit for it with forget whatever credibility, then I think Trump stays and it'll be very difficult to dismiss him. However, if it's a wipeout in 2022, I think people in the Republican establishment will say Trump is now a massive liability and we've got to find a way of getting rid of him or his presence. Yeah.
I wonder if that, at the CPAC speech, there was the rumor Trump might announce for 2024. And then, of course, he didn't. But he did announce, you can donate money on his website and he's going to be supporting candidates in 2022. It almost seems like a trial balloon where if he can continue to sort of play kingmaker and wield influence successfully in 2022, maybe it makes his 24 run more likely. And if it doesn't work, then he can not necessarily gracefully exit, but at least exit.
That's right. And of course, David, if he were to run in 2024 and won for, as he put it, a third time, I'm sure you'd have no contest at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think 2022 will be the moment at which the Republican Party will either decide we've got to hang on to him, even if we can't stand the thought, because he does win for us. And this is all, this is not my opinion. But if it's a wipeout, then the problem is there isn't an obvious candidate, which you would think by now there might be. So 2022, I think, is going to be a pivotal moment for the Republican establishment.
How much does all of this, number one, depend on and will be guided by what's going on in other parts of the world? Because at the time of Trump, we also had the rise of some of these nationalist right-wing parties in different parts of Europe, the Boris Johnsonization in England and all of these different things. And that also may change over the next 2 to 4 years. Is Trump big enough now that it doesn't matter anymore? Or is there still some kind of global picture here that will dictate?
I don't know, and correct me if you disagree, but I'm not sure that what's happening outside of America particularly informs what happens inside America. I mean, the Brexit vote for me was an indication that Trump could happen. Right. But I don't think it's possible to say that Trump happened because of Brexit or that it paved the way. I think the conditions in America were amenable to a Trump win, which wasn't as obvious at the time as it was in retrospect. So I'm not sure global politics will have much bearing.
Yeah, I'm not inclined to, at least not to disagree strongly. In terms of the production of the film, and we're talking with James Fletcher about the documentary, The Accidental President, you produced it over quite a period of time. How do you even manage logistically? You have all of these interviews, you have the big picture story you want to tell. I'm trying to figure out how are you organized day to day to end up putting the story you want to tell together from all the footage that you have?
What happened was we finished our last interview with Kellyanne Conway the very day Trump announced lockdown in the United States. So that was, I think, early March of last year.
Yeah.
And we started editing literally a week before lockdown. I just appointed the editor. And so I never spent any time in the same room as him, which is extraordinary and unheard of when you're working on any film. And the same was true of everyone else in post-production. The composer was in Los Angeles. The sound design was done in London. The color of the picture was done in Texas by a guy from New York who was in lockdown with his wife's family. So it was a real challenge. And all the meetings that you would normally have in person and trial and error and creative ideas weren't possible in the normal way. But we got there, but I think what you were asking is we'd locked the film from June 15 until election day of 2016. So in a way, it didn't really matter. The only thing I was personally disappointed was that we had to release the film later than I would have liked to, but it's a balanced piece anyway. I don't think it would have made any difference to the outcome of the election had we released it, for example, in September, as people encouraged us to. I think if I wanted to affect the election, I'd have had to basically do a hit job on Trump, and that's not what this film is.
When you're sitting there and you're putting it together, and as people will see when they watch it, that there will be, I'll say something and then it'll cut to somebody else and then a third person. Are you working off of transcripts to say, we want this line and then this line, or are you going from memory from the interviews, which seems like it would be so difficult to do?
It was a bit of both. I mean, I did all the transcripts myself. So in my head, I had all the lines I liked. And then I went through the transcripts with literally pen and paper, and I put lines under, for example, all the things I wanted to put in the film that you said. Then, of course, you're into the fact that it's just under 120 minutes, 110-minute film. And so sadly, when you've got 20 almost 1 hour interviews, a lot of things don't make it into the final cut, which is really frustrating. And then, people have asked us, should this have been a 10-part, limited series? I'm not sure people would have the stomach for that. I'm not sure I would have had the stomach to make it and watch as much Trump as I did. But we didn't have a plan, and everyone approaches documentary making a different way. But I think between me and Noah, the editor, it was really the two of us who did this whole thing, and obviously massive credit to him. We just followed our nose. We probably would not get an A in film school for the way we did it, but I just felt it had to feel very natural and keep moving. And so we were brutal in edit. If someone was waffling or going on too long, bang, the sentence was cut in half.
Right. That's how most of my footage ended up being cut, in fact, because there was the waffling.
David, not possible.
No, it's an excellent documentary. We're talking with James Fletcher, the producer and director of The Accidental President. And where are the easiest places for people to find the film?
So it's on Apple TV in 72 countries. We've translated the subtitles into Latin American Spanish. It's also on Amazon and Google Play, so the whole Android platform is covered as well, and YouTube.
James, thank you so much for talking to us about it.
Thank you very much, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media, and you can contribute any amount you want on Patreon, as little as $1 per month. Plus, you can get the daily bonus show, world famous at this point, and the daily commercial-free TV show by making those pledges at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is audience-supported media. We depend on the support of our viewers and listeners. Whether you listen to the podcast, watch on YouTube, or watch us on TV, or even listen on the radio, patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
People are finally starting to wake up to something crucial, something I've been talking about for years. When Republicans wage a war against so-called cancel culture, when the right decries businesses making decisions about what's best for them because of backlash from the public, what they are criticizing, what they are fighting against is the very free market that they have been defending almost to the death. I mean, it's almost a religion for these people, the free market. And they've been doing it really since the Reaganization of Republican politics in the 1980s. This a prayer at the altar of free market capitalism. And this exposes a deeper truth about the American right wing. Not only are they short on policy, as we've talked about many times, and not only do they simply play on values, even the values they play on are only relevant up to the point at which it becomes inconvenient. What I mean by that is they talk about the power and the efficiency of markets to guide economies and cultures and countries. They say markets are much smarter than government officials or politicians. But then, as we saw this week, when Dr. Seuss's publisher decides, here's 6 books out of a whole bunch, here's 6 books that we're going to stop publishing because some of the content doesn't really fit into what are considered acceptable sort of social norms and portrayals of minorities right now. That's a free market decision made by a for-profit company because they looked at public opinion and they said, let's make the decision that's best for our bottom line. And Republicans instantly throw their supposed values out the window and spend 3 days, and probably it'll be more, talking about the travesty of Dr. Seuss's so-called cancellation. So not only do they abandon their supposed free market principles as soon as they don't like the outcome dictated by the market, they also weaponize it into the very outrage porn that allows them to make money by covering this stuff on TV. It's not new that they abandon their values when it's inconvenient. This is just the latest way. Think back. When Democrats are in the White House, all they talk about is debt and deficit and the importance of balancing the budget. George W. Bush comes into office, among other things, gives tax cuts to the rich and goes to war, a really expensive war with the wrong country, and in so doing explodes the deficit, and they say nothing. But then Donald Trump comes into office and then cuts taxes for the rich, blows up the deficit again, and they say nothing at all. And yet, not only do they abandon their values when it's not convenient, they want to inject government into it when a market guides a decision that they don't like. And look at the trajectory on this Dr. Seuss thing. We are for free markets and keeping government out. This means you would imagine businesses do what they want as long as it's not illegal and the government stays out of it. Dr. Seuss Enterprises, which made more than $30 million last year, decides here's 6 books we will not continue to publish. They're not canceling Dr. Seuss. They're not burning books. They're saying here's 6 books we will allow to go out of print, but if you want to buy a used copy, you can go ahead. And all of a sudden, the sovereignty of business to do what it wants to do goes out the window. But not only that, Republicans, including people like Jim Jordan, the congressman, demand congressional hearings on cancel culture. Why is any of this the business of the federal government? Where is Rand Paul as a principled libertarian to say there is nothing for the federal government to do related to this? We should have no role here whatsoever. Hearings? No way in hell. These are private businesses making decisions however they want to make them. They're not breaking any law. So quite simply, the government should have no involvement whatsoever. The market, as they like to say, should be allowed to work its magic. If this decision by Seuss Enterprises is wrong, then the market will take care of it, period. If more people are mad about this decision than the number that like it, and they want to exercise their ability to participate in free market capitalism, they can say, well, I'm not going to buy any Dr. Seuss books anymore. I'll go buy whatever. I don't even know. And then the market will take care of it. This is their view. which they now are abandoning. But the truth is that this has nothing to do with their stated principles. What they mean by the free market is a market that pushes society and culture and institutions in the way they want it to be pushed. They don't like the way that the market forces are leaning right now in the direction of sensitivity to racial and ethnic issues. They don't like it. And that's fundamentally what this is all about. And this makes, I've said before, this movement that only wants to talk about principles. Principles are a great place to start. But when you only talk about principles, you enter what's called a philosophical black hole. And the really difficult work is figuring out real world situations. This is so one part of the principles movement that's bogus is that they very quickly abandon their stated principles when the outcome isn't what they want. But this is the other aspect of it, that when you only talk about principles, you end up with situations like this. They don't like it. That's what this is all about. And then this is also extraordinarily profitable for many. And that's what I want to talk about next. So let's continue our discussion of the fake cancel culture war and the entire apparatus that's been built around things like Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head in the midst of COVID, economic crisis, inequality, lack of access to healthcare, falling humiliatingly and woefully behind on climate, on and on. I could give you the full list. You know the list. Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head are what we are hearing about in right-wing media. This is something that Lachlan Markey, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, wrote about in Axios this morning. And that's a really important aspect of this. The new grift is outrage profiteering. Now, in a sense, outrage profiteering has been around forever. The idea of if it bleeds, it leads is sort of a nod to outrage profiteering. We know that salacious and controversial stories in general generate better ratings than stories about waterfalls and ginger snaps. I don't pretend this doesn't apply to the David Pakman show. If my show was all about, random good news, a charity built 10 toilets in some country this week, we'd be out of business by now. Like, I completely recognize that what makes many shows compelling is you point to problems, you point to injustices, you propose solutions. But Lachlan Markey in Axios outlines something that has really grown lately, which is the grift of profiting off of fake scandals and fabricated outrage where there should really be no outrage. Now, Markey writes about it in Axios more in the context of political fundraising and campaigning. This is something I've talked about for a long time. If the country is more and more in favor of gay marriage being legal, of abortion being legal than at any other point in history, and it is, the country is as left as it's ever been on those issues, why do right-wing politicians keep talking about those issues? Well, the reason is that those are issues where if you are opposed to gay marriage, if you're opposed to abortion, you are often viscerally and emotionally opposed, and you are likely to donate lots of money to a candidate that shares your view on those issues. So even though the country keeps moving further and further left, these remain great fundraising issues for Republicans. They profit from generating outrage, often fake, around things like, Democrats want to abort your kids even when they're 3 years old, that type of thing. But not only do Republicans line their pockets with this outrage porn and profiteering, right-wing media does it as well. Look at Fox News over the last 72 hours. Dozens of stories, I'm not exaggerating, dozens of segments about Dr. Seuss. And that's because the outrage generated by the fake headlines about Dr. Seuss being canceled and these being the new book burnings, those headlines generate way more outrage and thus interest and Twitter shares and Facebook views of Fox News clips than a story about Democrats passed H.R. 1, which, by the way, was our lead story today on the show. And likewise, there are now so many so-called independent right-wing channels that also profit from fake scandals, that they are similarly grifting around this outrage profiteering. Now, I don't want to start naming names. I don't even want to give them publicity. Many in my audience will know the grift fake outrage channels that I'm talking about. But this is the new grift, and we shouldn't expect it to go away for as long as it's profitable. Now, Should our goal be to make it less profitable? Well, you know what? If we fix the problems we have in this country, the outrage grifting will become less profitable. And what I mean by that is when we look at how fake stories spread, they spread because they are weaponized and targeted to uninformed people who don't know any better and lack media literacy skills with which they would say this. It would be humiliating for me to share this. Many people I went to high school with don't seem to have this ability. You should see what I'm seeing on my Facebook page. But people, if they were more educated and better equipped with media literacy skills, they would never share lots of the stuff that catches fire on social media because people would say, this is obviously fake. I'm not going to share it. So I don't know that the goal, the primary goal is not let's make outrage profiteering less profitable. The goal should be let's fix education, let's teach epistemology, media literacy, and give people tools which will naturally make this sort of outrage profiteering less profitable. It won't be unprofitable. It will be profitable to some degree because of the tendency toward where people gravitate to salacious and explosive stories, even if they're fake. But we could definitely take the wind out of it by better education, teaching media literacy, and equipping people with the tools that they need to identify that this is not something I want to be sharing. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Every few months, the San Antonio troll comes out of the woodwork. And this guy has been calling in for years at this point. And what I love about this caller is almost every time he calls in, he criticizes me for something I haven't even talked about. And he's doing that again today. And what's really funny is some of what he mentions, I haven't talked about. Some of what he mentions, I haven't even heard about. I don't know what he's talking about here. Listen to this.
Pakman, I think I've solved it. I have solved why you, Don Lemon, Joy Behar, Bill Maher, Vosh, all the same copy, you all have the same kind of exact same politics.
Okay.
I figured out why it's more important.
By the way, Bill Maher and Vosh do not have the same politics. Okay, let's continue.
Why, for one, none of y'all are talking about why the $15 minimum wage is they're kicking the can to 2025. None of y'all have spoken about that. But instead, we're worried about who's starring in the next Disney Plus film.
I didn't even know there was a controversy about the next Disney Plus film.
And that Superman going to be black.
I didn't even hear about anything about Superman being black. These are stories I haven't even heard of, never mind talked about. Why is he calling me? He should be calling people who talked about it.
Nike, Colin Kaepernick, and Nike shoes. I figured out why we're more worried about that than actual workers getting a fair wage. Because you're rich. You, Don Levy, y'all got money. Who cares if workers get more wages? But Disney, that's what y'all like Disney Plus and Netflix, so it's important that they have
Disney Plus. I don't know what he's talking about.
Non-white actors and stuff like that. I get it. But man, dude, some of us really need money, man. Where's that COVID relief your boy Biden promised?
And it's funny. He's acting like I'm talking about Disney Plus and not COVID relief. Who on the left has been more critical of the delay on this than I have? I mean, lots of people are being critical, but we've been following the delays on COVID relief from day one. We've been covering the watering down of COVID relief from day one. I think this guy's got the wrong show.
Nowhere in sight. They keep pushing it, and delaying it, and this and that.
I'm with you.
Oh, it's 2025, and it's $1,000 now. It's the same thing, and it's you guys keep making excuses, but instead, on your
I've made no excuses.
Channel, the most important thing in the world is Disney Plus and Netflix.
Yeah, so that's the San Antonio troll, and I wish he does things a lot of people don't do. He's audible in the voicemails. A lot of people call in, you can't hear what they're saying. He gets right to the point. A lot of people call in, they go 3 minutes, and before they even get to the point, the voicemail system. The San Antonio troll could be a good caller, but he's criticizing me for things that I've never even talked about, and sometimes that I don't even know about. It's sad. It's a sad state of affairs. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Mike Pence finally breaks his silence, and he's criticizing the 2020 election. We will talk about why some U.S. Catholic bishops are discouraging parishioners from getting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We will also talk about Parler suing Amazon again, and what's going on with that. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Get instant access by signing up at joinpakman.com. The coupon code remains available. The coupon code is BETTER21, all one word. Could be lowercase. You could spell it all caps. You could alternate. It's not case sensitive, but it is all one word, BETTER21 at joinpakman.com. I'll see you on today's bonus show. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.